Welcome back to the news today. This is One on One. For years, my guest tonight, Dov Weissglass, was witness to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and to Israel-U.S. ties from the inside of the Israeli decision-making circle. Beginning in 2002, in the midst of the Second Intifada, he served as bureau chief and advisor to late Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, all the way through the unilateral disengagement from the Gaza Strip in 2005. And Mr. Weissglass joins me tonight. Thanks very much for being with me.
My pleasure.
So given the news of the day and of the week and of the few weeks, I must start with the United States. If we thought that the U.S.-Israel relationship, specifically Obama-Netanyahu, couldn't get any worse at the Congress speech, it seems that now it has, after his election period statements about a Palestinian state. You've seen that relationship from the inside for many years under a different administration. How do you view the current situation between the U.S. and Israel?
Well, the current situation now is primarily affected not by issues of good manners or political ethics like what has surrounded his Congress appearances. What Mr. Netanyahu said a few days ago, that during his tenure there will be no Palestinian states, is a clear breach of political agreement between us and the United States, which is the roadmap.
Did it shock you that he said that?
Yes, definitely, yes. Everybody should remember that the two-state solution, or the vision of two states, was publicly stated the first time on June 24, 2002. And the one who carried the message was not Mr. Obama, it was Mr. Bush, very Republican president. His June 24 address was followed later by the roadmap, which is the political endorsement of the ideas that have been raised by him. The Israeli government on May 2003 adopted the roadmap, and it became a government resolution, part of the law of this country. Soon afterwards, the roadmap was adopted and was endorsed as a unanimous agreed resolution of the Security Council, and that was the basis of our foreign policy for many, many years. Now, for a prime minister to come now and in one sentence just to dump such a fundamental principles of our foreign policy, that upset the U.S., but now very substantially, as I said.
So after we saw Netanyahu going on MSNBC after the election and sort of saying, well, I didn't mean it exactly, backtracking on his comments, clearly the United States doesn't seem to be buying that, saying straight up, we don't know who to believe, which version of Netanyahu. Is there any way, is there any going back for Netanyahu in terms of the relationship with the United States?
I think what the United States said, and I think that just recently, maybe I think today or yesterday, is that instead trying now to figure out which of his statement is correct, I mean the first one or the second one, I say he will be judged by his actions. And since we know that for the last 6 years the Israeli-Palestinian political track is practically blocked, Mr. Netanyahu will have now to try very, very hard, not by further statements, not by further explanation or clarification, but by actions. And that will not happen.
So if we're talking about actions, I guess you sort of answered my question. Do you think Netanyahu has any interest in a two-state solution? If we're talking about not the politics, not the statements, but the actual planning behind it.
Well, I cannot talk on behalf of Netanyahu. I don't know what his real interest is. I can tell you that he is incapable now to take it over. Because of the form of government that he composed. I mean, what he called his natural partners, and the overriding principle of the current government, of course, is the consideration of the settlement activities and the settlers themselves.
Do you think that Netanyahu is able to, every Israeli prime minister, as you know better than myself, has had to deal with that, with the settlers, with the right wing within a coalition or even outside it. Do you think Netanyahu can ever sort of separate himself, his policy, from the right wing that would not want to see a Palestinian state?
If Netanyahu would reach the same historic decision like Sharon has made, in 2003, but it's a process that continued later on, but towards the end of 2005, after the rip in the Likud, the disengagement, Sharon have reached the conclusion that with the present political setup that he's on top of, he will never be able to continue with his political plan. That's why he stepped out. He founded Kadima. And Kadima was supposed to be the proper political platform for his future plans vis-à-vis Judea and Samaria, etc. So as I said, if Mr. Netanyahu will reach that point where he believes that in order to take this historic move and to try to change the faith of history, he will have to walk out of the Likud, and that will not happen.
As someone who's seen the disengagement from inside, who was such a part of it, 10 years later, a decade later, it's often blamed just as recently as the summer in Operation Protective Edge. We hear the Israeli leadership saying often, look what happens in Gaza, we left and all we got was more missiles. Do you think it was a success, a failure, something else?
Again, the major reason to leave Gaza was the fundamental understanding that the occupation of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza will be over. I mean, will have to be ended sooner or later, and probably soon. And since nobody in his sound mind ever thought that Gaza would be part of Israel in any form of a final status settlement, so why to wait? There were missiles before the disengagement. There are missiles after the disengagement. A very common mistake made by everybody is to believe that the IDF left Gaza in 2005. The IDF left Gaza at 1994 as part of the Oslo Agreement. If you remember, Jericho and Gaza first. As of 94, the Israeli Defense Forces were not employed anymore inside the cities or in central refugee camps. They were circling those various settlements, and they were present in some major road junctions in Gaza, but they had never been inside Gaza. In 2007, when Hamas took over Gaza, if Israel would think then that Israel should intervene, it could be done from the outside. I mean, there was it's not that limited small forces who were surrounding the settlements who could prevent.
Would you do it differently? Anything differently in retrospect?
No, again, but it has to be judged within the broad context. If in the broad context, a prime minister like Prime Minister Sharon believe, as I said, that the occupation must be ended, that certain territorial arrangements between us and the Palestinians must be taken place, so to leave Gaza first is almost necessitated. If the present government, who believes that there will be no territorial concessions, and Israel will stay or will continue to keep the same areas that were occupied in 1967, from that perspective, the withdrawal from Gaza seems to be a mistake. But I must say that the current government, despite all these slogans, time and again, I didn't see any serious effort to enter Gaza.
So ending with the little time we have left on the current government, you've been quoted before saying that Ariel Sharon put his country before his party, and that perhaps Netanyahu puts his party before his country. If you were advising, if you were still in that inner decision-making circle today with Benjamin Netanyahu, any top advice for him?
I don't think that I could be, well, an advisor in the first place. It's not something that is disconnected to the realities around him.
Of course.
You have to think along the lines that the Prime Minister thinks. You have to understand what the Prime Minister wants to, and maybe to try somehow to improve the how, not the if. Mr. Netanyahu holds an opinion and a concept which is totally the opposite than what Mr. Sharon learned to believe. I say learned to believe because when he just resumed his office, he also was a typical Likud product. It's just the realities around him who taught him that
there was no other way.
That there's no other way. And that's what was characterized by his very famous statement: what you see from here, you do not see from elsewhere. And but the same change, unfortunately, didn't happen with Netanyahu. So there's no way to advise him, from my perspective.
Lost cause, it seems, from what you say. Thank you very much, Weissglass, for being with me. Thanks very much for this. And that's it for us for tonight. Find us back here in the Jaffa Port tomorrow night for another edition of the News Today. Have a great night.